Hello, everyone. Welcome and good afternoon. We'd like to get started with our K-State Garden Hour series today. I want to thank you for joining us. This series is hosted by K-State Research and Extension. My name is Kelsey Hattisall, and I am the horticulture agent for the River Valley District, and I will be your host for today. Before we get started, we'd like to do a couple of housekeeping notes to cover. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please use the Q&A section. There should be a button on the bottom tab of your Zoom link. Just put all your questions in there. That way our moderator can find them. Our moderator today will be Ariel Whiteley-Knoll. She is the horticulture agent for Shawnee County. Our moderator will be keeping track of the questions that come in, and we will do our best to get through all of them at the end. Today's webinar will be recorded and it will be posted at our K-State Garden Hour website. We typically upload some additional resources related to each topic as well. You will also have access to any previous topics, as well as a list of upcoming topics in the series on this website. We have recently added several events to this series and will continue to do a week-to-week schedule through September, and then we'll go to one topic per month in the months of October through December. This event is in this series have been promoted by the K-State Horticulture Natural Resources Facebook page, and you can follow that and watch for any updates from the university and as well as upcoming topics in this series. Be sure to like, share, and use the hashtag K-State Garden Hour to help us promote this program. This webinar series has allowed us to continue to provide extension education and related topics of horticulture, and given the circumstances we're in today. Everyone involved in this development of this series as an extension professional for K-State. Today's topic is growing garlic in Kansas. I am pleased to introduce our speaker today, Mr. Chuck Otte. He is the extension agent for Geary County. Give us a few minutes while Chuck gets his presentation ready to go.
All right, thank you. And we'll try to get going here right away. Just a little bit of a background. I started about 15 years ago, actually, getting interested in garlic, and 10 years ago, I started trying to grow it and made absolutely every mistake under the sun. So I can share your frustrations. About 5-6 years ago, I got really serious about it, and it got a little bit crazy around my household and my garden. So anyway, I've subtitled this A Fun Crop to Grow and Use. So what we're going to talk about today is, first of all, what is garlic? We're going to talk about, just all the production and harvesting and storage of it, planting, fertilizing, weed control, watering, insects and diseases, harvesting and storage. Most of the illustrations, and there's several throughout the program, are right out of the catalog from the Fillery Garlic Farms. It's where I buy mine from. Great people out there. All the photos are taken by me of my garlic. So I didn't have to get any releases from the garlic plants or anything. So what is garlic? Well, it's been called an herb. It's been called a spice. It's been called a miracle food. You'll always get those that say, well, it's protection from vampires. And even a book that I'm reading right now talks about that. And a lot of people just call it garlic. It's loaded with folklore and mystique and more than just a few myths, but it's just been absolutely fascinating the past 5-6 years to get deeper and deeper into garlic, so to speak. Garlic is a member of the allium family. Allium, sativum, or sativum. My Latin isn't that great. Same family that has onions, and shallots are just a type of onion. But shallots, like garlic, are normally planted in the fall. Leeks and elephant garlic is actually a leek. It is not true garlic at all. So I'm actually not going to be talking about elephant garlic today, but the culture is pretty much the same. And then chives. Worldwide, there's over 700 species of allium. But these are the most common ones and the ones that most of us are going to encounter on an annual gardening basis. Garlic is used in many ways, and we don't produce nearly enough in the U.S. to meet our domestic needs, basically about half of it. It can be used fresh, which is what a lot of us do, dried or minced, powdered. I've got all three of those in my house at this time. Some people even use it green, and we'll talk a little bit about using part of the garlic plant, the flower stalk, later on. It originated likely from South Central Asia, the southern part of the former Soviet Union. Countries like Uzbekistan like that, and probably lopping on over into part of China. I think it's helpful to think about growing garlic by remembering that it kind of came from the same part of the world as winter wheat. You plant it in October, you harvest it in June. And that just really seems to help out. But it's been around for thousands of years. From its origin point, it went east and west both. Average annual U.S. consumption is 2.5 pounds, and I laugh at that because my wife and I probably go through 25 pounds a year. So there's a lot of people out there that aren't eating any garlic at all. And culturally, people from Northern European cultures, it's just something that's not used. But elsewhere in the world, it's used extensively. It is vegetatively reproduced. Otherwise, if you're going to plant garlic, you are not going to plant garlic seed. You're going to be planting a vegetative part, the clove. Most of the U.S. commercial production is in California. In fact, it's the only state that USDA reports totals from. All the other states simply don't have enough. In the 2018 census of agriculture, there were 33,000 acres of production in California, produced 574 million pounds for an average yield of 17,500 pounds. Trust me, you in your garden are not going to come close to that kind of production level. In fact, most of when I see from other extension services, cost return projections, they're talking about 5,000 to 6,000 pounds per acre annually. Good commercial producers can get 7,000 to 12,000 pounds per acre. Garlic does not produce viable flowers or seed. We're just within the past 5-10 years, we're getting a little bit past that. But really, it doesn't produce a viable flower, unlike all the other alliums, which makes garlic improvement a real challenge, as you can't do the traditional plant breeding thing of crossbreeding them and making selections. Changes have occurred over thousands of years simply by point mutations from one garlic plant to another. Some of the books that I've read talk about bringing some garlic into a new area, planting it, and then keep replanting that same seed, and then picking out the ones that thrive. And it's those sort of selection procedure that has created all that we have today. And there's hundreds of garlic cultivars. It is a bulb, like all alliums, and the leaves go all the way into the soil, and they form what we're going to eat. They can produce bulbils, which are aerial secondary cloves, and I'll show you some pictures of those. And those are primarily in hardneck varieties, and we'll talk about that here in just a few slides. The true stem of garlic is actually at the bottom of the plant. When you pop those cloves open, pop the bulb open and get those cloves out of there, the very base is the actual stem. Now, at the base of the inner leaves are tiny vegetative buds. These are specialized leaves. Sometimes we call them fertile leaves. They swell into cloves around each fertile bud. And the clove's purpose, other than for us to eat it, is to protect and nourish the bud through its period of rest. It isn't dormant, it's resting. And if you ever take a clove and cut through it, you can see a lot of these parts in there. It's different than about anything else you're going to grow in your garden, partly because of when we plant it. Cloves are clones of the mother plant. I say it's the Rodney Dangerfield of the vegetable garden. It gets no respect because people will just say, I need to go and buy some garlic. But calling garlic garlic is like calling wine wine. If you say, I want a glass of wine, they'll say, what kind? Because there's so many differences. Go to a store, go to your grocery store and look for garlic. You're going to see something like this. Most of this garlic is going to come from either California or Mexico. You don't know what type it is. You don't know what cultivar it is. It's garlic. And if you look at some of these cloves over here, those bulb wrappers are off, and this is going to have very short storage life. It has not been treated well, but you have no idea what you're getting. So we'll talk about buying some name varieties later on. Okay, let's go into garlic a little bit further. Allium sativum. There's two subspecies. Sativum, Allium sativum, sativum, what they call partial or non-bolting, has no flower stalk. Sometimes called softneck, sometimes called artichoke, occasionally called Italian. These are all softneck varieties. And then we've got what we just affectionately call the Ophios. Those are bolting. They have a flower stalk that comes up. I'll show you some pictures of that. Flower stalk, it tries to produce flowers, but it doesn't, but it does produce those little tiny bulbils. These are sometimes called hardnecks or top setters because of that flower stalk. Rocambole is sometimes, I run across that in the literature. Okay, let's peel that garlic bulb. And if I could have all of you here in a class today, I would give each one of you a garlic bulb and say, we're going to peel this thing open. Take a look at it, layer upon layer upon layer. On the left-hand side of the screen, here's a garlic plant. It's a hardneck. Here's the flower stalk coming up. And they all have these interesting little curls in there. And even what this looks like, what they call the spathe. is different from one type to another. If you start peeling into it, here at the bottom, where you pop all those off, is the actual true stem of the old plant. And they're all attached to that. And then here's that stalk going up through the middle, which a softnicks won't have. And then each clove has a clove wrapper on it. And then groups of cloves are going to have a bulb wrapper around them. And that, it's just, I wish I could have you here and we could peel through this and we could discuss it. But sometime just take a clove and cut through it lengthwise and just look to find that sprout leaf, the bud, where it's going to start growing from. Because all the good stuff here that we're eating is just supposedly fuel for that plant to get growing. So since I don't have you here, I peeled a garlic bulb for you. On the left is one of my artichoke varieties, and I just started popping these cloves off. We'll use that phrase a lot, popping cloves. And just kind of laid them out the way they went. This is actually an unusual one in that it doesn't have as many cloves as a typical softneck will have. But here down at the bottom picture, here is a hardneck variety with that woody flower stalk coming up through, and where you can see where all the cloves were attached. And over here, you've got the softneck, the one that I just opened up there, where each of those were. So this is the base of the stem. The roots come out of the bottom. You can see a few roots on this bulb right here. Okay, the sativums, the softnecks, we have two basic types, artichoke and silver skin. Softnecks are generally going to have more clove layers, and I'll show you an image next, and more cloves than hardnecks. Also have much longer storage life, longer rest period than hardnecks. Most of the varieties that are growing in California is going to be a softneck. It's probably going to be California early, California late, but you don't know because they're never marked. Even I've got into gourmet grocery stores and they will have garlic with absolutely nothing else on there. It's generally felt that softnecks have a milder flavor. And if you want to do the braids of garlic that you'll sometimes see, which are very decorative, I'm not that talented, so I don't try it. You have to use softnecks. Hardnecks simply will not work, trust me. Here we have, a type of the artichoke, a type of the silver skin. Kind of see these bulbs here. You saw this in my bulb up there. And here we call this the pseudostem, but it's not really a stem. It's just a whole cluster of leaves coming together, but no spathe, no flower stalk coming out of the top. Let's pop in one more. And something that nobody ever does except me is to take a bulb of garlic and just slice through it crossways so you can see the individual cloves. And these cloves are surrounded by a bulb layer. And here's one by itself. And then here we've got several that are surrounded by a layer for protection. In this illustration, you see that everything that follows an A is one clove layer. Then we got 1B, 2B, 3B, 4B. That's a second clove layer. Then you get the 1C through 4C and the 1D through 3. There's 4 different clove layers in this bulb, this stylized bulb here. This does not correlate to this at all, but just kind of gives you the idea of how they grow and have these layers of protection around them. Then the ophios. We've got hardnecks and weakly bolting hardnecks. All of these have flower stalks or scapes. Some of the weakly bolting, not every plant may do it, or it may not be that much. Generally, these are going to have fewer but larger cloves. Often much stronger, preferred flavor by gourmets. We often refer to these, the ophios, the hardnecks, as gourmet garlic. Much shorter storage life except for the creoles. So when you harvest them, I harvested in June, processed them in July, they got dry, and all my hardnecks I'm going to either give away or get used up by Thanksgiving because they're going to go out of condition pretty quickly. So we have the weakly bolting hardnecks, the Asiatics, the creoles, and the creoles are kind of an oddball. They fall somewhere between softnecks and hardnecks. And then the turbans, and sometimes you'll see Middle Eastern cultivars included, and a lot of sources now say those are so closely related, we're just going to call them the same. Then the strongly bolting hardnecks, the rocambole, the porcelains, the purple stripes. It's felt that the purple stripes probably are closest to the ancient garlic varieties. But within that, you've got purple stripe, glazed purple stripe, marbled purple stripe, minor differences between them. I say don't get hung up on that. Okay, here's a couple of hardneck varieties. And you'll notice that the porcelain on the right has one type of pig's tail here, curly Q. The rocambole on the other side has a much tighter coil. And you can see that here they have larger cloves, fewer cloves. And they're just, and this comes into play if you're ordering a porcelain variety to grow yourself. You're going to have to order more of it to get more plants because you may only have 4 to 6 cloves per bulb. Here we see the scapes, and the scapes come up, they start off going straight up, and then they go into this coil thing. Here we got 3 different types here. This is an Asiatic, this is probably a porcelain, this is probably a rocambole. And I'll mention this again later, but we generally feel that if you remove the scapes, once they start to coil like this, you will get larger and bigger cloves and bulbs. The plant doesn't spend all the energy trying to make this flower stalk. But there's another school of thought that says if you leave it on, the bulbs may be smaller, but they may store longer. Most of us go ahead and snip those off, pop them off, and you can sell them. You can use them for cooking. Some people put them on a grill like you would fresh asparagus. You can chop them up and run through a food processor and use it to make an aioli. You could make and I just forgot what you make with basil. But anyway, you can use it for all sorts of cooking. I usually don't intentionally leave my scapes on. Sometimes I do. And then they start to mature. And this just shows the difference between a rocambole, an Asiatic, a porcelain, turban, the different types of what that bulbal capsule looks like. And some have very long beaks. We call this part the beak. Some have fairly short beaks. Some have very small little bulbal capsules. This is what mature bulbals look like. Now, this is kind of a fun pair. I mean, that's a quarter there to scale, but you can see that they tried in this flower stalk, it tried to produce some flowers. But what usually happens is they don't develop, all the energy goes into forming the bulbils. If they do go ahead and open, they're usually sterile. They're starting to find varieties now that will produce seed, but what they have to do is go in and pull all these bulbils out so that the energy goes into trying to make a flower and a seed. So now you can take these are once again, they're clones of the mother plant. You can take them, you can plant these out. And I took one like this, took them last fall, and I planted them out. These are all, a year later. I will take these 2 are what we call single cloves or rounds. These actually differentiated into a couple of cloves. I will take all of these, I'll separate these and have multiple cloves, and I'll plant them this fall and try to get them bigger to try to get usable size or some seed stock for the future. Unfortunately, what I've got here, we're all from different varieties, and I forgot to keep them straight, so it's just a hodgepodge. I don't know what all we're going to get, but this is what we have this year, and then the 2 on either side are after 1 year of growth. Now, the soft necks, while they don't send up a flower stalk, sometimes they will have bulbils on the stem or the pseudostem. This will usually be just an inch to 3 or 4 inches above the bulb. Fewer bulbils in there, they're larger. You can see in relation to the quarter. So there may be three bulbils in here, and I'll go ahead and plant those out this year as well. We think this usually happens in artichokes and silver skins from stress at some time. Maybe it got hot, maybe it got dry. It's hard to tell, but I know in years when we have had some heat stress, like a couple of years ago, I did get more of the bulbils from the soft neck. This is a great chart because it really breaks it down into things that you can go by. How many cloves per pound? And if you look at, say, an Asiatic or a porcelain, 40, 45 cloves per pound, where a silver skin or an artichoke will have 65 to 70. Number of cloves per bulb. Here we're looking at in the porcelain, 4 to 6. 4 to 7 in the Asiatic. Creoles are kind of, like I said, are an oddball. They're more than a lot of these other hard necks, not as many as the soft necks. And then look at the storage life. Asiatic and turbans, 4 months of storage life. 4 to 6, 6. But Creoles and the artichoke and the silver skins are 10 to 12. One of the reason the big California producers are doing artichokes and silver skins is because they have such a much longer storage life. You've got longer period of time that you can get them marketed and sold. A lot of the garlic that's produced goes into minced and dried onions or into garlic powder. So a lot of them don't even make it to the fresh market. Goes into a lot of other characteristics here, but down here, climate preferred, I want to point out that the Asiatic, the turbans, and the Creoles, they want a hot climate. Creoles get the name because they grow well in Louisiana. But they really do better to the south. I grew some Asiatics and turbans for a couple of years. I have not continued with those simply because I haven't been pleased. All the rest of these do well. The artichokes and the silver skins are very versatile. They can take about anything, but porcelain, rocamboles, I plant those. Purple stripes, I continue to plant all of these because they do well in our Kansas conditions. Okay, so I mentioned the winter wheat connection. Most of Kansas, we need to plant in the fall. mid to late October. Bulbing, as it does with onions, occurs late in the growth phase, as in the last 4 to 6 weeks. Pulling bulbs early, it looks like you're going to have a big, thick onion with a different smell, different flavor. Harvest can be anywhere from June through August. Virtually all of my harvest dates have been in June. One year was a drought year. I started harvesting May 30th. Yes, I keep track of everything. I'm that much of a garlic geek. But generally, I figure that by the 4th of July, I'm going to be through harvesting and my garlic's going to be hung to dry. It's a survivor. If you think about the harsh climate where it evolved from, once you get it planted, it's going to survive. You can ignore it and it will grow. But to make big bulbs, you need to do just a little bit more, the same way with everything else in the garden. Buy quality stock from a reputable dealer. The garlic you buy in the grocery store, you don't know if it's a hard neck or a soft neck. You can probably figure that out pretty quick by taking a look, just grabbing the top and squeezing it. But you don't know the cultivar. You don't know if it was treated with anti-sprout retardants. Sometimes they even will irradiate them slightly to stop it from growing. So get a named cultivar that you know will do well in Kansas. If you want some recommendations, I'll be happy to give you recommendations. You know, the stuff in the grocery store isn't certified seed stock. It may have disease in it. A lot of the disease comes in late in the harvesting stage. It can carry through, and if you plant those out, you're going to have problems. There are many good sources online. Mid to late October, most years in most of Kansas, we can probably go into early November. If you wanted to try planting something early in the spring, like in March, I would probably go with a Creole variety, or maybe an Asiatic or a Turban, something that does better under hot conditions. You want to plant it so that the clove moves out of the rest phase and gets some root growth started. You don't need to have above ground growth in the fall. Sometimes you do. One year we had a late fall and it stayed warm and I had quite a bit of growth. Didn't hurt things at all. But you want to get those roots into the ground because they can get heaved out of the ground by frost. A couple of years ago, we had some harsh weather. I had some cloves that had not gotten well rooted and they got popped right out of the ground. When you get your bulbs, you're getting ready to plant them. When we break it down into the individual cloves, we call that popping the cloves. And it's generally felt that you want to do this the day of the planting or within 24 hours of planting. Once you pop it off there's some sense that it starts to stimulate the clove to start to grow. So you don't want to get that going too early in advance. Planting depth, basically 1 to 3 inches. I aim for 2. Beds versus rows. For small garden, rows work just fine. If you're only going to have 1 or 2 rows, it doesn't matter. If more than 1 row, 6 to 12 inches between the rows. And then I like to space mine 4 to 6 inches apart within the row. For large production, commercial growers, what I'm kind of heading to myself is what they call beds. They get a bed worked up and then they'll have like 5 or 6 rows, 8 inches apart. Ideally, it's felt that each garlic plant should have 40 to 50 square inches. Right now, I'm in 12-inch rows, 6 inches apart. I've got 72 square inches. That's probably almost twice what I need. So I'll probably be tightening my rows up a little bit and going more to a bed production. They go with these beds like that because then they've got areas to walk between the beds, because 8 inches doesn't give you room to walk between the rows. Or if they've got mechanical work, they can drive the tractors down over those walk lanes. So this is my bed from, I don't know, given where it is in the garden, probably a couple years ago. Those are on 12-inch centers. You'll notice I've got drip irrigation going back and forth through there. And you can also see I've got a problem with some western ragweed, a perennial weed. I'm working on that. And this was a wet phase because I did have some algae growing there on the soil surface. One of the things about garlic is not a lot of leaf area. It doesn't do a good job of shading the soil, which is why we're trying to get it closer together. Mulch is very, very helpful. You want to keep the soil cool as long as you can in the spring. Heat is not a garlic plant's friend. And you also want to keep the weeds down because the more sunlight that gets to the soil, the more likely you are to have weed problems. Okay, planting. Pointy end up. You can also look at the bottom of it and you can see where it was attached to the mother plant. You know, that goes down. What happens if you don't get pointy end up? You get something that looks like this. This was actually a bulb that I missed a year ago when I was harvesting, tilted up last fall, and basically the bulb got flipped upside down. So this was exactly as it was growing. The stems had to come out and go up, and the roots had to come out and go down. I was tilling this part of the garden up then this spring to plant my summer garden, so I just dug the plants up and used them. Cover the bulbs, firm the soil, don't pack it. I mentioned mulching can help, protect from the winter cold, but most of our varieties aren't going to have a problem that way. But more importantly, keep the weeds down and keep the moisture and keep it cool. I wouldn't water them in the fall unless it is bone dry. But if you do water in the fall, only do it once. There's a direct correlation between seed clove size, when we often talk about seed clove or seed stalk, and it's not really seed, but the clove size and the bulb that it produces, especially with hardnecks, especially with those hardneck cultivars. Soft necks tend to be much more productive. I plant them, I don't care what size they are. I have planted small hardneck cloves, and they do produce smaller bulbs. So smaller cloves off of hardnecks should probably be used for culinary purposes only. Garlic, evolved from an area where it was very rocky, dry, infertile soil. So they will survive. But to get a nice big bulb and nice cloves, you need to fertilize at or before planting with 1 pound of nitrogen and phosphorus per 1,000 square feet, or 1/10 of a pound per 100 square feet. 12, 12, 12, 13, 13, and a lot of those will all work. If you've done a soil test in your garden and know you've got high phosphorus levels, you don't need the phosphorus portion. If you want to use organic fertilizer sources, blood meal plus bone meal, 2 pounds each, will work very, very well to get that across, and it's a much slower release. Early in the spring, about the time you start to see the little green sprouts popping through the soil, fertilize it again at the same rate. You can stop right there, or if you want to, you can do a second application a month later from when you did that first spring application. You don't want to go any later than that. It can delay maturity, and it can cause excessive vegetative growth, and that's going to make the bulbs smaller. So we're always, like with so many garden plants, we're walking that fine line between getting good production, getting a good sized plant. We just got to kind of play with it a little bit. pH, I didn't mention pH. It likes a fairly neutral pH. Its native area, it was going to be neutral to alkaline. I added a little bit too much sulfur a few years ago in my garden, so I've got it down slightly acid, and I need to get it limed this fall before I till it up. But shoot for a neutral pH. Mulching for weed control is great. There's not very many products labeled for post-emerge weed control in garlic, as in with other garden crops. Any of the garden weed preventers, such as preen, anything that has trifluralin, are generally labeled for all allium species. So that would be leeks, that would be onions, that would be shallots, that would be garlic, can all usually be used on. Late season weeds, this would be late May, early June. Watch those weeds that come up, get them out of there, because they are going to compete for both sunlight and for soil moisture. So get out there and start pulling weeds. Watering. Garlic roots go much deeper than most gardeners think. They're much more aggressive than, say, onions. If normal rainfall doesn't occur, I normally say 1 inch a week for gardens and lawns, but for garlic, it's 1 inch every couple of weeks. Supplemental watering will help. You want to be careful the closer we're getting to bulbing and towards maturity. If it gets too saturated, root and clove rots are going to happen. Either to use a light sprinkler, or what I prefer, a drip hose, or just an open hose going down, gravity flow down the row. Here you can see 2 years ago when I dug my garlic, it had gotten dry just as they were maturing, just a perfect set of situations. You can see how far out the roots go. You can see how deep the roots go. And when I dug these things up, I got a good clump of dirt with it, but it knocked off very nicely. But you can see a very good root system underneath these plants. These grew up in a near desert condition. These, I should say, evolved in near desert conditions. So they had to be pretty good at scavenging water. Insect and disease pests. We're fortunate that we don't grow thousands of acres of garlic in Kansas, because we don't have the opportunity to build up a lot of insect or disease pests. Now, the only insect pests we're going to see are onion maggots or onion thrips. Occasionally I'll get maybe a wireworm that starts to get into one, or maybe a white grub, but really not much of a problem in Kansas garden situations. Using good certified seed stock from a certified grower, most of your disease issues are going to be avoided. Plain and simple. Excessive moisture near harvest is likely to cause bulb and clove rots. And when we say rot, it's actually usually a mildew, and you've got a period of time that you can get them used up, and that comes down to when you're harvesting and sorting them. Rotation helps. With my garden spot, I've been able to be on a 3-year rotation. got to go back from the east end of the garden this year to the west end, but I'm also expanding the amount of garlic I'm planting by about double. So I'm probably going to have to go to a 2-year rotation or get a bigger garden. See which one my wife will let me do. Do not treat garlic like onions. When it comes to harvesting, you do not let them dry down. It works okay on onions. You don't want to do it on garlics. We already talked about the snapping off the scapes. I'm researching that. I'm putting out a lot more hardneck cultivars this fall, and I'm going to look and have side-by-side comparisons of one row I snap the scapes off, one row I don't, just to see what happens here. But for right now, for most of the time, I'm snapping the scapes off. If you don't snap them off, you remember how they were curled, they will uncurl. And here's, you can see the spathe and the bulbal capsule there, the big old beak going up. And this also has a pretty good example of the mix of green and dry leaves that you want to have on the garlic plants when you harvest them. Avoid late season irrigation. Can't do anything about rain. May was wet this year here in my part of Kansas, and I wound up with a lot of plants that put on a little bit of late season growth, and the moisture caused those bulb layers to split, just like this. Not attractive. They're going to eat and use just fine, but that can also be a place where mildew and cloven bulb rots can enter and get started. Artichoke varieties, what we do on all the varieties is look at how many green leaves are left. Not how many dry leaves there are, but how many green leaves are left. With the artichoke and the silver skin varieties, we can probably get by with 5 green leaves. All the others we harvest at 6 green leaves. You're sitting there going to look at these things and go, those are still really green. I shouldn't be harvesting them. Yes, you should. Yes, you should. If garlic gets completely dead, you're going to get a lot of solar radiation on the soil, which is going to heat up the soil that can start cooking the bulbs. And that's going to shorten the storage life. It's going to hurt the quality. The more dead leaves you get, the more likely some of those outer bulbs, because remember, all those bottom leaves are those outer wrappers that protect that bulb. And just like with onions, the same way, you want to be able to leave as many of those bulb wrappers, those dead leaves, on to protect what's inside, keeps them from drying out. When I judge onions at county fairs, the 4-Hers will always get scolded if they peeled it down to bright, shiny, fresh leaves. Don't do that. Leave those as many leaves on as you can. When I harvest, I use a spading fork, a potato fork. I usually harvest in the evening to avoid getting too much heat on them, but I will dig 10 plants at a time, get them over in the shade of my apple trees, and then I'll knock the dirt off and I'll tie them together with twine. It's going to take probably 2 to 6 weeks, depending on your location, for them to totally dry down. But just like onions, you want that neck totally dry. You may have to go in after a couple, 3 weeks and test cut a couple of them. And here's some from probably 2 years ago. Just harvest, tie them up. You can see others that are tied up back there. And then I literally just hung them on the wall of my garage. I've moved out to my in-laws farm now, and so I've got more garage space to hang them in. But because I plant multiple varieties, I also label every single one of them. You can see that these were some of the first ones I harvested. These have just recently been hung. And so you can just kind of start it. It takes a few years to get a feel for when they really are dry. Okay, once the necks are dry, you want to trim the tops back to about 1 inch. Soft neck varieties, you can probably go down to 1/2 inch, but you want to make sure that all those leaves, all those bulb wrappers go up and kind of form a little bit of a safety valve, a seal up at the top. Hard necks with that woody flower stalk going up through there, you're going to need pruning clippers. Soft necks, garden shears, heavy scissors, you can clip the leaves off, clip the tops off. Brush the remaining dirt out of the roots, trim them back to about 1/2 to 1/4 inch. Toothbrush works great for cleaning these up. Not the one you're going to use every day, but an old one. But if the outer bulb wrappers are really dirty, carefully remove them. Don't remove any more than you absolutely have to. They help protect the cloves, keeps them from drying out. Check the soundness while cleaning. I kind of alluded to that earlier. Squeeze the bulbs to check the firmness. Store bulbs in mesh sacks. Do not use solid plastic bags. I refer to that as death by Ziploc. Paper sacks will work, but don't pack them, too deeply. Here's what mine look like. I bag them up by cultivar. This happens to be a purple stripe variety. Cleaned up very nicely that year. That was last year's harvest. Cleaned up very nicely. You can see the roots are trimmed back. The tops are probably a little bit over 1 inch long. I always err on the side of caution. And then I've got my tag on the back side there, and you can hang them up to dry. Ideal storage temperature, if you had it, would be 32 to 35 degrees. Humidity is 65 to 70%. Big commercial production has controlled storage that does this. We don't have that in our house. So we just store at cool room temperature. I normally will have mine I've got it back in the pantry. It's fairly dark in there. Like I said, I was harvesting this year's crop as I was using up the very last of last year's crop. So it works out very, very well. You don't want to put them in a refrigerator. 36 to 50 degrees replicates fall planting conditions and will start the bud swelling and sprouting right away. If you want to do a little experiment, go to the grocery store, buy 2 garlic bulbs, just stick one in the refrigerator and leave one on the counter, and then just watch them over the period of a couple of weeks and see what happens. And I'll just 9 times out of 10, the one in the refrigerator will start growing much sooner than will be the one out in the out on the counter. It's a lot of fun to do that. Ooh, I'm making good time going through here. Good resources out there. There is a good Facebook page called Garlic Growers Group if you're on Facebook. Word of warning, these people are all over the world, literally. They're from Mexico to Canada. So when people are talking about varieties that they're growing or planting dates or harvest dates or a lot of things, you need to pay attention to where they're from. But I picked up a lot of good information from that. Penn State Extension has a great 4-page leaflet, or maybe it's 8-page, called Garlic Production. Just do Garlic Production by Penn State Extension. You can find it. If you're thinking about getting big, and big to me is anything over a half acre, you're getting into some serious production there. If you start going to an acre of garlic production, figure a production cost of around $15,000. It's not a cheap crop to get into. The Complete Book of Garlic by Ted Meredith is one that I finally just picked up this summer, and I read about half of it over Labor Day weekend. It is very in-depth, just absolutely amazing book. I've got it sitting on the desk behind me right now, and I'm hoping to finish it up here while I go on vacation in a couple of weeks, but just goes way more in depth than a lot of people might want to, but it's really incredible. My recommended first reference is this one called Growing Great Garlic by Ron England. Ron is the founder of Fillory Garlic Farm, and it's just a good, practical, not a thick book. You can get it, you can find it and you can find anything on the internet, but you can find it there. You can order it from Fillory Garlic Farm. He kind of takes an organic production approach to it, but he's not preachy about it. If you're an organic grower, you will really like the approach that he takes. If you're not an organic grower, he makes mention of non-organic methods. So he is very, very straightforward with it. And it's really just his 30 years of experience of growing garlic. And it has just so much wonderful information. And email me, call me. I'm more than happy to answer questions. People will send me pictures of garlic, and I'll try to figure out what's going on with it. And I'm still learning. Like I said, I've only been at this about 10 years. I dove into it big time, like I said, 5 or 6 years ago. Love sharing my experience with people. More than happy to answer any questions, that you may have. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing, and we'll get Kelsey back in. I went through that a little bit faster than I planned on, but that's okay. I get excited about garlic. I can't help it.
Thanks, Chuck. I've learned a lot from your love of garlic. I know we got a few questions we want to get to today, so I'm going to kick it over to Ariel.
Thanks, Kelsey. Chuck, I'm so glad you finished early because we have lots of great questions in the chat box. The first question is from Nancy. When you were mentioning that a lot of our non-US garlic is from Mexico, she thought we got most of our non-US garlic from China. So if you could just clarify where we get that.
I'll be happy to get into that. The fresh garlic is California or Mexican. China is flooding the garlic market around the world. Most of that is going to be processed either into powder or it's going to come in as minced garlic, something like that. If you see the big jars in some kind of preserve, sometimes I don't know if it's vinegar or what, but minced garlic, a lot of that's coming from China. So in that, the commercial garlic growers are really concerned about China flooding the market. Be interesting to see what happens after this year with the pandemic and see if that's still the case. But yeah, China is a big player when it comes to garlic production.
Awesome. And then we had a lot of questions about where people could access lists of the best garlic varieties for Kansas, and then also where can they purchase these varieties to grow?
Very good. If you get on the internet and just start going, but there's urban farms, there's a lot more garlic farms out there than I even realized as I started going through some of this. How about if I make a list of some of my favorite garlic varieties or ones I think are well suited to Kansas, and we can put that on the page. Also, and I forgot totally to put this on there. If you go to gardeningwithchuck.com, I've got a link on that page that goes to some of my garlic experiences, a list of the stuff I've grown, pictures, sharing my thoughts on things. But gardeningwithchuck.com, look for garlic on that homepage and click on that, and it'll get you into more information about it. But I will make up a list this afternoon, get it to Cheryl or somebody, and that way we can put it up there of my top find. I'll tell you right now, my number one variety is an artichoke variety called Enchilium Red. It's just, to me, it's just as consistently doing a good job. I also do Silver White, which is a silver skin. Music and Chesnock Red are probably my two favorite hardneck varieties. Mateki is another one that just absolutely failed on me this year, and I'm not sure why. I'm going to take a year off from that and try it again. I'll probably plant that in 2021. But Enchilium Red, Silver White, Music, and Chesnock Red are my four favorites. And then I've got a friend that has given me some that her mother brought back from the Philippines, and I've been growing that and increasing it and trying to select for larger bulb size. So I don't know how that's going to go, but I've been having fun with that. Being a plant breeder by training, I love trying.
That's awesome. So outside of, if we don't have any Filipino connections, could they find those at garden stores or order them from catalogs online? What would be your recommendation?
Catalogs and online are probably going to be the best way to go. Sometimes garden stores will have it. I've got a high school classmate in Nebraska that says her son was able to find some named varieties at Garden Center in Wichita. I don't know which one, but check your garden center first, see what they've got. I will say that the online sources, I was on one the other day, and about 80% of the cultivars were already sold out for this year. So we've got about a month, 5 weeks, 6 weeks to planting time. So you've still got time to get online and get something ordered.
Great. So our next question is, can you grow garlic in pots?
Can you grow garlic in pots? I've had people that have tried that with limited success. The problem with growing anything in pots in Kansas where you're going to go over the winter with it is it gets so very cold because the cold can come in from all sides. If you do that, plant it, leave it outside until it starts maybe Thanksgiving time, and then move it to an unheated garage someplace, bury it in straw, do something to keep the really cold air from getting to it. One person here locally tried it in the big whiskey barrels, half whiskey barrels, and everything around the outside edge died. Only the stuff in the very middle survived.
Awesome. So 2 more questions kind of along the lines of planting. The first is, this person has sort of a limited space. Would it be okay to plant garlic in between onions?
Sure.
Perfect.
We're certainly not going to crossbreed. That's not a problem. Yeah, absolutely. The thing is that you've got to remember, though, you're going to be planting the garlic in the fall and everything else in the spring. So you've got to adjust for that. And then the other thing is, like I said, my garlic is out by before the 4th of July, where I've got my garlic, I can go right on in then with my fall crop, my fall garden if I want to.
So the timing works out a little better.
Absolutely.
And then are there any vegetables that you shouldn't grow near your garlic?
Not that I have encountered.
Perfect.
I see no antagonistic effect from it. Interesting, the unique garlic flavor, and I'm going to get off on the weeds on this one, I'm sorry. The unique garlic flavor that we get when we cut into it, when we taste it and all that, doesn't form until that bulb is disrupted. And the one book that I'm reading right now goes into way more detail on that than I ever thought possible. But yeah, until you actually, so if you roast whole garlic, it's going to be much milder than if you just take a fresh clove and bite into it. So that's one of the reasons.
That's interesting. So if somebody maybe hadn't watched this webinar yet and already had their garlic in the ground, what should they do?
Just mulch it down well. If you get excessive fall growth, or late summer growth, fall growth, you can have some damage going back in it. So mulching it heavily as we get into November, December is going to be very, very important to protect it through the winter. But if you just got shoots that are just a couple 3 inches tall, don't worry about it.
Okay. What about storage? This person particularly said, so you should store them in total darkness?
No, not necessary at all. Not necessary at all.
Okay.
In fact, it's not necessary. It doesn't hurt them. I know a lot of the big commercial facilities, they're going to be stored in total darkness, but it's more they don't need to have the lights on. The garlic doesn't care. But no, if you keep them out on the counter, I keep a basket out on the counter that has the most recent ones that I'm using, and it gets typical kitchen sunlight. They're fine.
Perfect. And then I think there's some jealousy for how beautiful your garlic looked that you were storing. So one question is, how are you cleaning those roots off? Are you spraying them with water? How do you get it to look so clean?
And I should have put that in there someplace. About 50% of the sources say do not wash the garlic bulbs. The other 50% say wash it, but make sure you get it dried well. No, I just, I clean them. Like I said, I dig them, knock off the dirt that I can. Some years it's been a wetter, last year was a horribly wet harvest. I was mudding them out sometimes. And just let them get good and dry. And then most of that dirt will just knock off. And just a lot of times, like the variety that I showed in the purple bag, of course it'd be a purple bag. It was, I just had to take off one bulb layer because the dirt just came off so well. I just didn't have any problem at all that year. This year was not quite as clean, but not as bad.
Awesome. And then if you have harvested just a little too early and you only have that single bulb, can you put it back in the ground?
Yes, you can. You can put it back in the ground and do that. One of the things that I want to do this next year is to start about the 1st of May and pull a plant every week up until harvest, and take pictures so we can visually see what does that development look like. But it happens just in the last few weeks and it grows fast. A lot of times, just like with onions, when it starts to bulb, you can see the ground at the top, just the base of the plant start to split. But it does happen very, very early.
Awesome. And then there's a couple people asking about the varieties in the website. We will go ahead and link those when we send out the post Zoom information, just so we can have, there was a question about spelling, and Chuck, I won't make you spell on the spot. So we'll type that out just so we have it. And then another question was, how do you make garlic powder?
Garlic powder is simply what normally happens is the individual garlic cloves are sliced or minced, spread out, dried, get it good and dry, and then it's just pulverized. Basically, you could use any kind of a food processor, a blender to do that. Because I tried this once, and I probably could have killed myself if I wouldn't have been more careful, is do not try to do your own flavored olive oil. If you just take a bottle of olive oil, and start dropping cloves in it, or start dropping cloves in, add olive oil, you will create a very nice smelling olive oil. But when I did that, and after about a month, I took the lid off of it, it was like champagne coming out of there. So I contacted our food safety folks, and it was botulism poisoning. If I would have used that, I could have killed my wife and myself. So there are some ways to do that, but don't try to do that. Now, when you dry it like that, and grinding it and like that, you don't have the opportunity for the botulism to get formed, only when you try to make it in olive oil. Just don't do that. And the book I'm reading right now talks about the same thing. Don't do that. Botulism is a nasty, nasty compound. So yeah, it's basically dried down. I was going to do some dried minced onions, garlic this year. I still got time to do it. I just haven't gotten to it yet.
Awesome. I'm so glad you mentioned that about the olive oil, because that's something I know our family consumer science agent gets a lot with herbs and all kinds of things in there. The next question is, where do you get mesh bags for storage? That beautiful purple bag you had.
I get mine, those I got from Fillery Garlic Farms. You can order it by the foot. It's not that expensive. They actually have more than one color. So, but of course I had to have purple. But yeah, you can get that from there. Even if you just get, if you're careful with the bags that you get your onions in from the grocery, you can reuse those. So, but yeah, I think I bought 100 feet of that a couple years ago, and it's been lasting me very well.
I'm surprised you haven't gone through 100 feet already.
Well, I was sacking some up for a friend the other night and said, ooh, I may have to order some more by next year.
And then the last question I have so far is, if you do buy bulbs at the grocery store to plant, should you only buy organic?
that's going to be a personal choice. It's going to be a personal choice. My production method isn't purely organic, but I don't use herbicides. I use commercial fertilizers, but that's a personal choice, just like growing your garden. You're probably going to, I mean, just because it's organic doesn't mean that it's going to be any better quality as far as knowing what you're getting or anything else. Somebody I just noticed down here, Tom, says that organic bulbs won't have been treated with an anti-sprouting agent. Good point. So if you want to go that route, get organic. Good point. Thank you, Tom.
Perfect. That is all the questions that we have today. Got through them.
I want to thank, I figured there'd be about 12 people on this webinar today, so I'm just tickled to death to see, you know, almost 200 people pre-registered for, and I saw up to 133 there. So thank you, all of you garlic aficionados out there. And seriously, if you have questions, just email me. I'll be more than happy to visit with you about it.
All right. Well, thank you, Chuck and Ariel. Once again, thank you all for joining us on the Garden Hours series hosted by K-State Research and Extension. We are so glad that you could be here today to learn about growing garlic with us. We have several interesting webinars coming up. Next week's topic is fall tree planting, how to do it the right way. Be sure to visit the K-State Garden Hour website to see all of the upcoming topics. This session was recorded and should be posted by tomorrow afternoon on the same website we just mentioned. After the webinar ends today, you should also receive a prompt to take an evaluation survey. Please fill this out as we would greatly appreciate your feedback. If you have any other questions, please don't hesitate to reach out at us at ksuemg@ksu.edu. Thanks again, and everybody have a great rest of your week.